Assalamu alaikum, Musleh. All
Assalamualaikum.
right. How are you doing? Wa alaikum
Alhamdulillah.
assalam.
How are you
How
doing,
are
Mufti
you?
Sahab?
I'm good. I'm good. Where are you joining us from, Musleh?
From Toronto, Canada.
Yes, Toronto, of course, of course. So we've had you before. We've had you before.
Yes,
How?
yes, yes. I've communicated with you a couple of times.
Yeah. How are you keeping? And
Alhamdulillah,
share
Alhamdulillah.
your glorious thoughts with us.
Actually, I was listening to you, and you were talking about hadith. You said that there is no sarih hadith about the hands.
Folding up. Sarih and Sahih. Sarih
And
and Sahih.
sahih, yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
to be folded or uh, left at
Yeah.
the side. So this actually piqued my interest, and I wanted to share
Sure.
something that I came across. I usually go on Clubhouse and I talk with people over
Oh,
there.
right. Okay. All right. You're a man of great patience.
we
Somebody
do miss you over there.
somebody asked me, why don't you come on Clubhouse? And
Yeah.
I said, because I appreciate my sanity and I don't
That's a very true statement. Nonetheless, it is a venue for us laymen to learn and share ideas and listen to other learned brothers. So one thing that I have studied is about, you talked about hadith that is sarih and sahih. So I looked into the issue of rajam, stoning.
Oh, Frenchman. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So of course there is no ayah in the Quran that talks about that. Even in Surah Al-Kahf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا يُشْرِكْ فِي حُكْمِهِ أَحَدًا. So do not associate anybody with Allah's hukum. And then in Surah Maida, مَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ ظَالِمُونَ فَاسِقُونَ, all of them. So the hukum is from Allah, always. And then I went into the hadith to see if there's any hukum from Rasul alayhi salatu salam. I don't find any hadith that is sarih wa sahih, as you said, about somebody who's married, muhsin, to be killed if they are found guilty of adultery or zina, and there's 4 witnesses, for them to be stoned. There is no sahih or sarih hadith like that. There is one hadith I came across in Muslim. I think it is 1690.
I was going to say there are some in Sahih Muslim, but okay,
Yeah,
carry
yeah,
on.
yeah. But the wording is very interesting, Mufti Saab. The wording is talking about thayyibat, thayyib.
Yeah.
It is not talking about muhsan. And thayyib in chapter 66, I think it's verse 5. It comes there in the Quran as well. And thayyib means widow. It doesn't mean muhsana.
Okay. All right, sure. I mean, okay, so right. I mean, this is such a big topic. So I it's not one right now that I will be able to go into so much depth.
Yeah.
But just touching up on what you're saying. So right. So okay. So thayyib, by the way, the way they use thayyib is in contrast to virgin. So they use it to mean non-virgin.
Yes.
Thayyib. So right. So they
that requires verification.
Yeah. So this is how generally I'm just saying. Yeah, of course that's a different discussion, but the term that they use is bikr and thayyib. So virgin and the non-virgin would be the thayyib. Now, I would right. So okay, this is. I've not really explored this in that way that you're saying. I've not taken apart all the ahadith literature that is commonly found in the major books on rajam. I've not done that. So I can't, but I have obviously read, obviously, like when we covered the books and when we covered Sahih Muslim and all these, there are hadith in there. The general understanding that I would go with, and that certain ulama have taken, is that you see that rajam clearly is not from the Quran. Now, what in Sahih Muslim there is a hadith that the Jewish people come to adjudicate to the Prophet. So they say to the Prophet, we want you to judge over us based on our law. So, and then it's the famous one where the person's covering the hand and the Prophet says, look, why don't you remove your hand and read the full verse? And it says about stoning. So several scholars do feel that this is one of the first time the Prophet gets involved, and but it is with the Jewish community and it's about their law. So the question is that here, does this simply, those people who took this, they took this as a continuation of the Torah, saying that this is what it should be, the stoning, because look, there it is, it's in the Torah and the Prophet said it. This generally, the Quran does not mention it, and the Quran does mention the punishment at the time for adultery, and it mentions it as a lashing, and this is why certain scholars like Abu Zahra, he highlighted the problem and the difficulty in trying to say rajam was what the Quran wanted, because what they say is that, look, well, the Quran, the lashing is for just the unmarried people. And so he highlights that that's very difficult, because Allah then continue, because the married person is called muhsan by the Quranic, the fortified person. They say, well, that's the wording. Now, the verses, as you carry on reading them, as it's speaking about the punishment for adultery, it mentions the muhsanat from the slave girls. وَعَلَى الْمُحْسَنَاتِ نِصْفٌ مِنَ الْعَذَابِ, that they have half of the punishment. So he says, well, this doesn't, well, you can't give half a stoning, so it clearly could not be talking about stoning. And he makes a very powerful point.
And there is also double punishment for the wives of the messenger in Surah Al-Ahzab mentioned.
Sure, okay, sure, but this point here with these verses about the lashing, so and then you've had there's a whole different discussion on trajectory hermeneutics, that is that can the punishment change with the day and age? And this is what several Malikiya felt was permissible, and that's when you've got people like Abul Qasim al-Burzali and the whole several Maghariba that came after him about 600 years ago, that changed these punishments to different penalties, financial penalties, and they said that this is what the Sharia dictates. This is not that what they're saying we're doing this because of our desires. They're saying this is, and sure, people can say, look, they got it wrong, and that's their opinion, but it's also an opinion and a way of looking at Islam. And it's also what some of the Ottomans did. Sulaiman al-Qanuni did as well. Hence he was called Sulaiman al-Qanuni in the Hanafi fiqh. And people may disagree with it, but it's a way of thinking and it's there. So it's tied under Maqasid al-Sharia. So what you can, I think, as a summary, as a very brief summary, not doing justice to the topic, is that, well, look, the stoning is there in Islamic history and in Islamic law. It is there for the most part, according to many, let's say the majority of the people. Now, there's a question, how did it get there?
Exactly.
And that's not quite clear how it got there, according to several people. So several people will say, well, because you see, whatever answer you provide, it then it raises more questions, because people could say, well, it was here, the Prophet said it. But then you've got another hadith, let's say Sayyidina Umar, or people transmitted from Sayyidina Umar, that it used to be in the Quran. And then, well, that raises more problems and questions than it solves.
Yes.
But then but when you start answering that, then this one can't be right. Because if
people talk about this shaykh wa shaykhata iza zanaya, so that's also an old man and old woman, and that doesn't say that a married woman.
But and even bigger problems than that, it being in the Quran, but it's not in the Quran.
Yes.
So then it means that certain parts of the Quran today are missing, that were never there. And then, okay, this raises a different discussion. So, okay, well, this has been part of, let's say, it's been part of Islamic law. What most Muslim history shows, it was seldom ever practiced. I mean, it was because the ruling is that, well, to see it obviously makes it almost impossible, because 4 people have to witness actual penetration, according to the scholars. So now that's very rarely, because normally when one person comes in and busts someone at it, the person gets up. Now you don't see.
Yeah, the
actual
Mufti said that the
penetration.
real issue is about whether it is actually Islamic. So where is the demarcation of whether something
Yes.
could be called Islamic?
So what right. So the question is this. The question is, it's clearly a part of Islamic jurisprudence. It's clearly a part of Islamic law, fiqh.
The
Right. So
jurisprudence of the scholars, but not of
sure.
Islam.
Right. But
Because
obviously
when
the
you say
scholars
something
are
is of
of
Islam,
scholars
it
of
has to
Islam.
be bima anzalallah. It cannot be
Right. So
called
this
Islam.
is a different discussion. So I
Yeah.
agree with you. See, I'm not of the view that I believe that this was, in my understanding, this was something that was a continuation of the Torah. Those people who kept it, it was never in the Quran. And this is why it was from the Ahkam. And according to trajectory hermeneutics, it was changed, which is according to the Maliki Madhab and the likes of Abul Qasim al Burzali and all the people that came after him that supported that view. So I'm of that understanding. So to me, that this would not be applicable and it would not be a part of the Islamic law. But that said, I do recognize that, look, this ruling is there in most of the Islamic fiqh and most of the Islamic. Now, the question is, how did it get there? So most people will say it got there because of these ahadith.
Yes.
Now, the hadith are there. They're not that the hadith ain't there. The hadith are there. The question is that some of the hadith, then it's not a congruent picture. Like they raise as many questions as they give answers. So they do give answers, but they raise more questions. So one of them is saying, well, oh, it began with, you've got the incident of the Jewish people coming. One of them is saying, no, it used to be a verse of the Quran and it disappeared. One of them is saying, well, and then you've got, so what I'm trying to say is it's not a congruent picture of how it got there. But we know it's in the fiqh, in Islamic fiqh, with the majority of the people, it's been there. In application, we also seem to know that it was seldom practiced. They don't seem to, like, if you look at the watha'iq of the, whether it's going to be the Andalusian or whether it's going to be the, in fact, in more detail, which is still available today, the Ottomans, which was therefore, the better part of 7th century. You can see that in their edicts are still there and they're being translated and people have done PhDs on them. I think they only ever found something like 2 cases or something. So you can see that it's okay. It seems to be there. It doesn't seem to be there on the ground. It seems to be in the books. How did it get in the books? Well, they say because of the hadith. Is it because, well, how did it get in the hadith? People say, well, it's from the Prophet. No, it's from God. No, it's from the Torah. And there seems to be some mixture. And there seems to be some scholars about 600 years ago who said, well, no, it was just part of the laws and the laws change. And they changed. They said this day and age, it changed to financial penalties. Other days and in other times, it would change accordingly. So you've got this whole plethora. And the reason I'm mentioning that is I'm just trying to do disclosure of what stands, as opposed to saying, look, nobody's ever mentioned. People, of course, the majority of the people have mentioned it. Let's be honest. The question is that all of these are valid questions. So how did it emerge? What was the, what fashioned it? Did it come from God? Did it come from the Prophet? Some people say, no, it came from the Prophet. Some people say, no, it came from God. It came in the Quran. Some people say, no, it came from the Torah. It was a continuation. And was it susceptible to change? Some people say, yeah, it was susceptible to change because Sayyidina Umar suspends it. You see, because if it was the had of Allah, then it shouldn't be stopped at all. But he suspends certain hudud, let's say, based on, okay, that's the chopping of the hand and other things. But so you can see that, well, okay, these things are subject to timeframes and changes. And so this is the summary. But you're right, there's a lot of questions on how did it enter Islamic jurisprudence? It enters through these hadith, but what is there isn't a pristine route. There's a lot of there's a
See,
mixture. Yeah.
yeah, the real issue, Mufti Sahab, I'm from Afghanistan originally.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it is something very closer to me because I have in my own life seen more than 2 stoning,
Oh no,
let alone in the history of Islam.
I categorically
Yeah.
categorically do not believe that this to be part of for centuries, and this was never, to me, it's a, see, so I was giving the disclosure of this is how the views are. Now it seems to me, it seems that, look, this was a continuation of the Torah for whoever thought it. In the lifetime of the Prophet, it was the verses that were in the Quran. Now it does seem to be that certain people may have thought that because the Prophet ruled for the Jewish people according to the Torah on this thing, that Sahih Muslim, that some people felt, oh, maybe that was also meant to be for us. So it got incorporated into the culture. So I do feel that was an ijtihad. I feel that that was not the accurate position, because the accurate position was the Quran, the verses of the Quran. Now, it's not that those people, let's say, that did that didn't know those verses of the Quran, but it's that this understanding that they saw the Prophet adjudicate, make arbitrate for that Jewish community based on the Torah, and they may have understood that, well, because the Prophet did it, now this is the new ruling for us. So
Yeah, but it raises
this
a
is,
question that it becomes
yeah.
shirk, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا يُشْرِكْ فِي
No,
حُكْمِهِ
I think,
أَحَدًا,
no, I
and
think
there is
that's
a
a
hukm of Allah
stretch.
subhanahu wa ta'ala.
No, I think that's a stretch, because I don't think anybody that brought this ruling in brought it thinking they're doing shirk. They may have thought. I think this is where it stems from. It's from this case. I think that case is, that is case zero. This is where it begins, in my estimation. It begins where the Prophet arbitrates for the Jewish dispute that was taking place. And this is case zero. So the Prophet is doing it. So and the Prophet isn't doing it, they do it, but he arbitrates for them. They come to him, it's in Sahih Muslim, they say that this has happened, he committed adultery with his wife, and blah 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 blah, and we want you to, you decide. No, not you don't decide, you judge according from our book. So that's the now, and the Torah stoning is clearly there in the Torah, so it adds up. This would be case zero. Now, certain companions who may have seen this happening, now that the Prophet said, well, okay, this is it, reading from, not reading, but had them read it in the text from the Torah, some people may have thought, well, oh, maybe this is the new ruling then in Islam. So this is where the understanding comes. So it's nothing to do with shirk, it's to do with perception. So just as, so for example, there's a hadith about fasting. Now, some person, there's a hadith that the Prophet is asked about kissing during fasting, and he says it's fine. And there's an incident where a young person comes and asks the Prophet, and the Prophet says, no, don't do it. And there's an incident where one of the people watching, he says that, what is this about? How come it was okay, and here it's not? You said don't. And it was, the reply is, or the understanding is, that this was a newly young, very hot-blooded, kind of excited person, and it was just for him. It wasn't that, it's just basically safeguarding that this guy, what, just fast out the day and then have at it. But because in between, you're not going to be able to control yourself. But that wasn't said in the hadith. In the hadith, the Prophet just said, no, don't do it. So some companion looking at that, just hearing that part, might think, well, actually kissing is haram during fasting, because he only heard that part. So it's not that he heard it wrong. He actually heard what he heard, but somebody who saw the other part may have thought, well, actually, no, the Prophet said to this person, you can do it. So it's absolutely fine. So you see, it's where the understanding stems from. So this is how I see it. So clearly, stoning, I do not see stoning as part of Islam, in the sense that, is it something Allah has ordained? I don't see it as that at all. I see that it emerged from the Torah. It was a continuation from there. Some people may have understood that, and it became a part of the Islamic corpus of law, of jurisprudence. Hence, most people clearly found it very uncomfortable, found something not right, unsettling about it, that they set the bar so high that it almost became impractical to do. And throughout like 14 centuries of Islamic existence, there's hardly any things where it happens, apart from where people have gone into barbarism and done it, just like you get the recent cases in Afghanistan and these places where they were doing it. But where you had a continued Islamic civilization, it hardly ever happens. And in fact, places like the Ottomans, they clearly redefined it. Just as in the Maghrib, they redefined it as well, and said that no, the Sharia dictates that we change it with the day and age based on maqasid. So clearly, to me, this was not something divine. It was not something that was, and it's clearly not in the Quran. And like people like Sheikh Abu Zahra say, it goes against the verses of the Quran. So that's how I would understand it. Okay, I do understand that many people.
Sorry, Mufti said, if you believe it's not from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if somebody is doing it, what kind of
I feel it's clear. I feel to do that, especially people trying to do that today, like they are. This is clear dhulm. I feel it's clear dhulm. I would condemn it outright, regardless of it being in the fiqh.
Yes.
Because the thing is that, look, even their fiqh has changed with the day and age. So even, the Afghanistan, for example, the Hanafi madhab has changed. And it's very clear that, look, let's be honest, it's very clear that the way that the fiqh had set the standards, the rules, nobody caught that. Nobody caught that. Like that is, it's a very tough sell. 4 people walked in and saw penetration. 4 people, like, come on, that's because look, this is what happens. A person bursts into a room, sees somebody having an affair. The moment somebody bursts in, people get up.
Yes.
You don't see anything. You just see 2 naked people at most. Let's say this is the best scenario, and you know what they were up to, but you don't see it. Now that in Islam is haram for them to carry out that had. It is haram, but emotions get the better of them. They want to punish.
But this is all created by men. It's a secular law for people seeing it, with their eyes.
Exactly.
It's a secular law that they have created and called it Islamic.
100%. But what I'm trying to say is, even by their fiqhi standards, it is not, what they are doing isn't even according to that. They know that. They're not. You see, even them trying to argue that this is in the fiqh, it's not like that. They are not practicing that by any standard.
So, I heard this from Javed Ahmad Ghamdi Sahab. He refers to chapter 5, verse 33, that those who do fisad on earth, that they should be killed severely. So one of the ways of killing severely is by stoning. And he says that this is fisad fil ard. So if somebody is raping, then this punishment goes for the rape. And he cites the case of Maira and Ma'iz. And Ma'iz gets stoned and Maira is sent back home. So this is what Ghamdi Sahab refers to.
You see, but this is the thing. Now, this is the thing, you see. This whole hadith with Ma'iz and, this whole thing, it is, first of all, very, in itself, you see, that's an interesting case, because in that case, the Prophet said, why did you not let him go? You should have let him go.
Yes.
They say it's in Musnad of Ahmad, the hadith, that they say that they catch him because he runs away. They catch him and they stone him, and he says, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do it. And they stone him. He says, I repent. And the Prophet rebukes them. He says, Halla taraktumuhu. He says, why didn't you let him go? So this is it. You see, the hadith, it's not that the hadith aren't there, but they raise as many questions as they give answers to. So this is why several people in the Hanbali madhab felt that there was isqatul hudud, all hudud with tawbah. That it was, so it's, it's not, you see, this is such a detailed discussion, because it's not that the fiqh isn't there. This is there in the fiqh, but the fiqh has so many layers to it like this, that then people ignore all the other layers, and that's not a complete discussion then. Because if you're going to discuss hudud, first of all, it's from the past, then you have to discuss what they all said about it. What you have to discuss those people who said hudud could be substituted. You have to discuss those people who said all hudud can be dropped with tawbah. All hudud. You have to discuss this then, because it is part of our legacy of Islam. If you're going to say, well, we're just going to take this one thing and we're going to do this act of barbarism, that any person who sees that act will have no doubt that Muslims, that they will abhor and hate Islam till their dying breath, right? It is so shocking. I watched once a movie and I was so moved. I mean, it broke me down, honestly. It was some Iranian movie. I think something of I've forgotten now. It was an Iranian movie. Was it about a lady called Soraya or something? But honestly, and it was so. Oh my God! I watched it something like 14 years ago, about like 12. I think about 10 years, 12 years ago, something. But still, now if I think of it, it disturbs me. I find this completely munafi for the rahmatan lil alameen. And I would say that, look, if people want to bring it as a fiqh discussion, I accept it as a fiqh discussion. I do accept that I feel it's wrong to say none of this exists in the literature. It does. It's all there in the literature. But then we need to have an open, clear discussion on all the other iterations where people are saying like, at-tawbah tusqut al-hudud kullaha, where we're having a discussion on, because you got to bring that in then, and you got to bring this hadith.
But the principle is given to us in the Quran. أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم فإن تنازعتم في شيء فردوه إلى الله والرسول. So if there is any kind of a dispute, then I don't care about who said what. Then we take it back to Allah and His Rasul.
See, but the problem then is, the problem is the same thing. Sure. I'm with you. But I would say that, the problem there is we never really take it back to Allah and His Messenger. We always take it back to the interpretation of what we think Allah and His Messenger are saying. And that's just the same. It's always the interpretation of what we think is being said as opposed to what is objectively being said, because none of us have access to true objectivity. None of us truly, like, we can just say, well, we think this is what we understand from this verse, and it's the same problem. So I feel that in that sense it's worth bringing all these discussions, because all these people have said these things. They've said, like, if you want to take it to the hadith, then there is that hadith, that the tawbah does seem to be mu'athira. It does seem to be impacting. The same hadith with Ma'iz, that the Prophet saying, why did you not let him go? So it does have that discussion. It does have the Hanbali discussion then on tawbah and dropping all of hudud. It does have the Maliki discussion as well as the Hanabila discussion on all hudud. Can they be substituted? It does have this. So when we bring all of this in, also the discussion that our hudud not punishments, not simply situated in time. So all the hudud that were mentioned in the Quran was simply hudud from 7th century Arabia.
But the real question is whether this is a had to begin with. Because the had is 100 lashes. That's a had, absolutely.
No, but my point.
Whether it's a had or not, this is the point of contention.
No, I think bigger than that. You see, I think bigger than that is the definition of how the phenomenology of a had and how a had emerges, not what a had is, not as in is. You see, you're talking about tahqiqul manat, and also I'm talking the ontology, the being of a had. That a had simply, you see, the Quran was going to only address the Arabs with things the Arabs already had. It was not going to tell them a punishment that the Chinese had, for example. It wasn't going to do that because they weren't Chinese people. So they were Arabs that lived in a certain, like, it wasn't going to tell them to use a weapon that they had in Scandinavia. It was going to just address them with things that the Arab climate had. So it was anchored and rested and nested in Arab tribal society. So the question is, when Islam expands beyond that and those norms have changed, does the day and age then impact the realities of those hudud? And this is what Abu Qasim al-Burzali was saying 600 years ago. He was saying that the maqasid of the Sharia say, as Islam spreads, it reflects its environment. So and he said today in the Maghrib, we don't have that environment that they had he's saying this 600 years ago. He's saying we don't have that environment that they had there. So we don't stone people today. He says that this is not the environment of the Maghrib. This is 600 years ago, Morocco and Mauritania and that part of the world. So he's saying here we do different things. So this is what the Sharia wants us to do, not what I want. This is his thinking. Now, what I'm saying is all of these things have to be part of the discussion. I have to wrap this up, man. Sorry, this is not my best morning discussion to have, but it's been good. We'll catch up, Musleh. Assalamu alaikum.